Hi, it's Tootie Tagerly coming to you live from San Francisco, midday on a Tuesday. And today we're really going to talk about transparency, vulnerability, all of this stuff that is really a little bit of the mainstay of how we live our lives at work. And I'm talking about work in technology companies, work at companies like Facebook where I used to work, and startups where we believe that we have our own autonomy. We believe that it behooves us to be open and transparent and have really great relationships with our work family. And some things that have really come up is really the book about radical candor, the notion that we should be able to be direct, open, caring, compassionate, and have these conversations with people around us. And then the second notion around it is I ask people a lot, what do you think the biggest number one secret to trust building is? And the answer is vulnerability. The answer is if you want to build relationships and closer relationships with other people, how you do that is you express more vulnerability. You express more vulnerability and openness, and you share a little bit because sharing begets sharing. And this is what I've worked with hundreds of coaching clients and through workshops and teachings. However, there's a limit to all of this, which is something that I've been learning a lot pretty recently. I've given a lot of workshops and classes about how to work with difficult people. And I walk through a number of different tenets, and I'll share some of them a little bit later on in the talk. But some of the most challenging scenarios are when the difficult person is your boss. I've had a client who she's not actually sure if her boss is on her side or if her boss wants to get rid of her. Now, she's had particular sessions where she's shown up at a one-on-one and surprise, HR is here too, but you're okay. You're not on a performance plan. You're not in trouble for anything. And the challenge is that with the assumption of vulnerability and radical candor is that the other person has your best interest in mind. The other person is on your side. The other person is going to exhibit good intent. That was one of the tenets of working at Facebook, that always assume good intent. But that's not always the case. Your boss is supposed to be 100% on your side and supportive and lift you up and help your career. But the reality is that is not the reality of many, many bosses, and they are not the people who are going to necessarily do that. So in those cases, there is a how much is too much. Where do you stop being so vulnerable and transparent? And I wanted to address that in this broadcast. The second thing that I have been really thinking about and exhibiting and experiencing lately is I have been running a series of leadership workshops for design leaders at a major technology company. And what's been happening with it is that I ran a session about cross-functional relationships. Essentially, these are not the relationships upwards to your boss or downwards to your team, but your peer relationships. In technology companies, to build products, you often have teams of product, engineering, design, marketing, sales, all of these different teams that need to work well together. And with these teams, we care a lot about cross-functional relationships. And I was walking through a workshop, teaching, sharing tips, and towards the very end, I realized that I had made a giant assumption. As we know, assumption makes an ass out of you and me. And the giant assumption that I had made was that these people that I was talking to would be able to sit down one-on-one and have a conversation with their cross-functional partners. That was really not the case. That was a mistake to assume that, because what do you do in a scenario when even the people you're trying to work with, the people you're trying to build great relationships with, the people you're trying to have radical candor and vulnerability with won't even meet with you? And that's when I realized that there is a whole big gap and we're not playing in the same sandbox. If the person doesn't have good intent, they're not playing in the same sandbox as you. So, what do you do in this scenario? How do you know if this is the case? The first point to think about is you don't know. I think you can always start with assuming good intent for the person. And what you end up doing is you start running experiments and gathering different pieces of data to learn a little bit more. So here's an example. Let's say that you are starting at a new company, it's your first 30 days, and you have a boss, and you've gone through this interview process. You really like the boss, you think that you could get along really well. Well, in your first conversations, which are likely in the interview process, maybe you open up a little bit. Maybe you open up and become a little bit more vulnerable. And then you see what the reaction is. Does she also open up and share? Does it make her uncomfortable? Does she stop and doesn't even want to go there? All of these are little experiments to gather data, and you don't start out going, "Whoo, I'm going to share you everything about my life." And as we learn a little bit, and I'm just going to share because I'm being vulnerable and I'm trying to build trust with her. Instead, start small. Just go 5% vulnerable, maybe 10%. It's building trust is a long-term relationship. Just start small with baby steps. I remember a very long time ago when I was pregnant. I was 5 months pregnant when I was interviewing at a company, and I tend to be a hammer. My approach tends to be pretty direct and open and out there, and I was clearly showing at 5 months pregnant. So I used that to have a conversation as I was interviewing to see what's the reaction of the companies around me. I could ask about their maternity policies, what things they have around. And this was about, my daughter's now 13. So this was about 13, 14 years ago, where a lot of our policies still weren't as strong. So I used that to kind of push that out as an experiment to be like, is this a place that I want to work at? So that's the first. Determine how much you want to be vulnerable and transparent by running these little breadcrumb experiments and see what the other person picks up. The second thing, which I use for really conversations with difficult people, building cross-functional relationships, is that if you're in this working relationship with someone and you want to get things done, you want impact, you want to ship your products, you want to really, you're at work for a particular purpose for this certain numbers of months and years. And if there are people who you have to work with, start with empathy, start with curiosity, empathy, understanding what it is that their discipline, their business unit really wants or needs to do. And how can you help? How can you be in service? How can you be in support? And a lot of it is thinking like a user researcher and putting yourselves in their shoes to try and support them. And a lot of it is not that fun because you're like, wait, but I want the empathy. They're not thinking about me. They're not thinking about my perspective. And yeah, that can be hard. Unfortunately, if you're listening to this, you're likely the one who wants to try something different, who wants to make a change. So you've got to start with you and see what the reciprocity is. It's the same thing about running different experiments. The third part to think about is that work is really not your only identity. I will link in the comments to an article that I've written about that, and so common in the startup world, especially for founders and co-founders, and common for people who work in large tech companies who work 60, 80-hour weeks, and where you find that your coworkers are your friends, your coworkers are your friends that you hang out with. You start to feel that your identity, and this was really true for me through my 20s and 30s, is my identity is as this design leader at this company, and these are the people around you. But work is not family. Much as though we try to talk about our work family, work is not family. Work is a transaction where a group of people are assembled together to fulfill some business goals or nonprofit goals, whatever it is in the best interest of the organization. Your boss may have your best interests in mind. Your boss may have, if you're lucky enough, unconditional love and support for you, but it's not the same thing as that of a relationship with a sibling. Some of my people may have contentious relationships with a sibling, with a parent, with a child. It is not an unconditional relationship. And what that means is that you do not have to be your entire, full, vulnerable person at work. You can show parts of your identity that are based on who you are, but it does not have to be entirely there. You can hold back. You do not have to share everything. You can hold back unless the information is needed. One of my clients, he was in a situation where he worked for a large technology company, and he is in a position where he's looking around at other teams. And the flexibility of working at a large technology company is they don't want you to leave the mothership company. So your manager and your group will let you look around to extend your opportunities with other areas of the company. And he had been pretty open and frank with his manager that this is what he wanted to do and this is what he wanted to explore. And then to his shock, about a month and a half into this exploration, he got pulled off the lead role of a really plum project. And his manager said, well, you know what? I'm not sure if you're sticking around, and I need someone to stick around through the end of this project. So he had done all the right things. He'd been open and transparent and confided all this information with his manager. And in terms of like the experiments to try, it was too much. It was too much. Hold back unless the information is needed, because managers are people too, and everyone wants to really think about what's the best interest of the org, balanced out what's the best interest of you as a person. So then this gentleman asked me, well, now I'm starting to interview outside of the company. Should I tell my manager? And I looked at him and I said, well, what have you learned? He was like, right. Okay. I'm going to keep doing this and I'm going to keep interviewing, but I'm not going to say anything. So that is so hard. And that is so hard, especially for me, because those who know me know that I'm pretty open and direct and I share pretty freely. But this is the fourth tip around, you don't have to always share everything. You can hold back unless the information is needed. And then the last point, related to the fact that work is not your only identity, is that sometimes when you're dealing with a difficult person and that person is your boss and you've run the experiments and you've tried everything possible, there comes a time when you know that, hey, this place is not for you anymore. This is not a fit, and you can leave. And I'm very well aware that we in tech are very lucky and entitled, and there's a lot of jobs around, and you can always leave. You can start the interview process. You can start gathering more information about what you like and don't like. And it is hard when we think of work as our identity and all our friends and all the impact that we can do. But having been in many jobs and having been a workaholic and been so into my 80, 100-hour weeks at my job, oftentimes when I leave and it's months later, I wake up from a dream. And I really think, oh my goodness, what was I doing? Work is not your only identity. You can leave. So I wanted to share because I am a huge proponent of openness, of transparency, of vulnerability, but it doesn't work all the time. It doesn't work if the people around you don't have the same intentions and they're not playing in the same sandbox. So what you can do is you can run experiments and gather data. You can be a little bit more vulnerable and see what they say. You can try empathy and curiosity, putting yourself in their shoes. I think one really important lesson to learn is work is not your family. Work is not your only identity, which means that you can hold back. You can hold things back to you. You can have and establish these boundaries unless the information is absolutely needed. And at the last resort, you can always leave. All right. Thank you. And I'll see you next week. Bye.